Hi there, my name is Daniel Scott, and this is a video of my game prototype and detailed commentary about the design choices I made, why I made them, and what I'd hope to do if this prototype were to ever become an actual fully fleshed out game. With that being said, let's get started. So in the beginning, I wanted you to regain consciousness a day later, as opposed to right after the crash. Because I wanted the mystery effect of not knowing what events took place while you were unconscious or anything that happened. I just wanted you to be able to see the horrific aftermath of what occurred, and this was mainly in part to a big influence of Dead Space. In that game, you have no idea what happened when you walk through the Ishimura, which is the ship the game is played on. You can only speculate based on the carnage left behind, the blood, the guts, the corpses, all of that. All of that environmental storytelling really captures the atmosphere and the horror more than just words could, which is something I really tried to emphasize during this prototype. During this journey from your ship to the mysterious one you crashed next to, I wanted to naturally lead the player's eyes towards visuals that would convey the ship's imposing its magnitude on you, as well as the desolate and ominous feel of the environment around you. I added the falling rocks for three reasons: forced progression of the level, a quick tutorial for how to run, but also to show the player that from the very beginning they are in danger. Like Dead Space, I wanted everything to be as diegetic as possible. Ideally, for a fully realized version of this game, I would have the cloneware wrist hologram communicator that would display these widgets that you're seeing on the screen right now, and that's how the tutorial information would pop up throughout the game. So for here, I am big on player choice and rewarding players that explore or test, everything out. This whole scene is completely optional. You saw the light behind the rocks to the left of you, and that lets the player know where to go. But if you're curious and want to shoot these rocks down and walk up to the edge, you can watch this scene unfold, which I feel adds to the horror of the situation. It adds more depth to the environment, and you finally get to see your first clone brothers and they're snatched from you. And it also introduces a very prevalent boss in the game. And now you can go down the path originally meant. Here's another example of naturally leading the player's eye to set up shots. So ideally, I'd have the monster rise out of the ground and eat the clone that you saw when you picked up the ammo, and that's when the chase would start. I would also extend the duration of the chase with more rocks falling underneath you and other obstacles you have to overcome. But this concludes the tutorial intro section of the game, and now we move on to the actual ship itself, where you will meet your first enemy. And so you enter the ship to see more of that environmental storytelling I was talking about earlier. So what you just heard was the Crate Dragon. He's still out there. In the fully developed version of the game, the Crate Dragon is one of the main bosses. So I want the player to always remember that the monster is still out there, just lurking in wait for when it finally meets you again. So throughout the game, and even in the short playthrough, there are times when you'll hear the monster's roar in the distance, just to make sure you understand in the back of your mind that it is still out there and waiting for you. So for this scene, I was really inspired by Dead Space on how they introduced their enemies and how they dealt with scripted sequences. They kept you in control of the character while these sequences played out, usually behind a glass wall. So you'd still feel immersed in the game, but you couldn't do anything to help when an enemy would attack someone. So you just had to sit there feeling helpless and watch, and I thought that really added to the horror element in an interesting way. As well as introducing the enemy as a real threat you need to be scared of. This enemy you just faced was the weakest and the most common enemy in this game. If I had it just pop out at you without showing what it could do, I don't think the player would be nearly as scared of that monster. That's why I wanted to show it as an actual threat. So having it grab a clone in front of you and then seeing the surviving clone react in terror establishes this enemy as a real threat before you even fight it. So once you kill that enemy, he lets you into the base. This is the central hub of the game, and also what sets it apart, in my opinion, from a game like Dead Space. This base is barren right now, but as you progress through the game, you can collect resource materials to upgrade and fortify it. After you finish the first quest you're about to be given, by this clone we'll call it the Engineer, you can come to him throughout the game and modify your base. A couple of upgrades would be properly barricading the doors and the vents, 2 sentry turrets to guard the door, and storage containers to place your resources in. You can also have the Engineer build stations where you can not only upgrade yourself, but also clones you save throughout the game. But I'll get more into the clone saving aspect later. The point of this engineering clone character is essentially to be this game's version of Dead Space's main character, Isaac Clarke, who is an engineer that crafts many things throughout the game. The reason that you as a player aren't the engineer is because I want you to feel as immersed as possible as a low-rank, basic, no-name clone. You're not an elite soldier, you're not the chosen one, you're the clone that we see get shot off to the side of the screen in all the movies. I feel like when you put players into that mindset, that would make the horror of this game feel really grounded and impactful, and it would be a new and unique perspective that players really haven't played through before. I feel like it also makes it more realistic for the player. In Resident Evil 4, another influence of this game, Leon is a trained elite soldier type of character. In Dead Space, Isaac Clarke is a brilliant engineer that can create his own weapons and upgrades. You are neither of those. You can fight enemies and upgrade yourself throughout the game, but you need help. You are a basic infantry soldier of a large infantry unit. You need the help of your fellow clone brothers, like the engineer to build things for you, or the clones you save to go out on missions. This way it's not only more realistic for the player, but also gives them a sense of camaraderie and emotional weight to their clone brothers, all helping with immersion, in my opinion. So now you have your first quest and direction on what to do. You need to get the plasma torch to secure the base and protect your injured clone brothers. So here you can hear the blind enemy you're about to see. It's another way of setting up the character, like in Dead Space, and there will be more to it when you cross this door. So when you come up to this part, you see the monster in the distance eating a clone. You know from the pointing clone back there that the monster's blind, and its hearing range is as far as the staircase. You have an easy path in front of it, but you see dead clones, a barrel, and a pool of blood. You know from this widget right here that barrels and puddles of blood make noise, and they alert it. So that leads you to the path to the right, where you can go through to stealthily come up behind it. With actual audio dialogue, I'd have the pointing clone explain it a little bit better and more, but I didn't want a massive widget for the player to read. However, I'm big on choice. If the player wants to take the intended approach and sneak through the path on the right while avoiding the noise triggers, perfect. But if they want to just take them head on, that's perfectly viable too. But they'll realize that while it can be killed, the monster is very powerful and has a lot of health, and it will very likely kill you. So now you see you need an explosive charge to get past that, so you have your first side quest without having to be told by anybody what to do. And for this playthrough, we're going to just sneak past it. Hitting any of these would trigger the blind enemy to scream and then come charging at you, and then you'll have to fight it. The path here is constructed in a way to naturally lead you to the spot right here. When you get a nice view of the monster eating away at a clone, but you also see a clone cowering silently in the distance. This sets up the first clone saving aspect of the game. After making it past the noise obstacles and not alerting it, you can unlatch the vent and send it down to the depths, killing it. The clone will then get up and you can now interact with them. It'll thank you for saving him, and it'll say that he is going to go to the base to see the engineer. You've saved your first clone. This is the clone saving aspect of the game I was talking about earlier. Throughout this game, you can save your fellow clones that are either in hiding or in danger from an enemy. Talking to them sends them to your base, and when you go back, you can send them on missions to gather more resources. You can also send groups of clones to go on patrol sweeps to clear out enemies, which can actually have a tangible effect in the game as you play it. If their missions are successful, then hallways that you constantly revisit on the way back to the base will have few to zero enemies popping out anymore. However, this is where both the resource gathering and the base upgrading have a big effect in this game. Before you can rescue more than just this first clone, you'll need to have the engineer build beds in order to house them, as well as the injured ones you saw back there. And before you send them out on resource gathering missions, you'll need to have a med bay built to heal them from the wounds they sustained. Also, before you can send multiple clones out for patrol sweeps, you need to have an armory built so you can arm them with guns and armor. The med bay and the armory also lets you upgrade your own health and weapons. However, not only do you have to upgrade your base, you also have to fortify it with the barricades and the defenses mentioned earlier. If you don't keep up with the fortifications like maintenance and upgrading, then you risk your base being overrun by enemies. You'll get an alert from the engineer who's in hiding that your base has been overrun. You have to go back to your base and clear the enemies out, only to find that all the clones that you saved that aren't currently on missions are dead, except for the engineer, of course. and then you'll have to start over saving new clones. I want to stress that this whole aspect of the game is optional. You only have to barricade the doors and the vents with the plasma torch you'll get by completing this first quest. However, the moment you start saving more than just this first clone, your base is now at risk of being overrun, and the more clones you have, the higher the risk. Which is why resource gathering, base fortifications, and base upgrades are a huge part of this game that work in tandem. This is something that Dead Space and some other third-person horror games did that I really liked. They had a lot of pass-through rooms that essentially acted as cooldown rooms. Just an entrance door, small hallway, and then an exit door. These small rooms have nothing in them but serve as a nice cooldown for the player after intense moments. It can't be full tension all the time. I feel like the player would get numb to it. They might even get frustrated by the constant anxiety. So small breaks between the action is in my opinion, very necessary. These can also serve as separators of different areas. It's not just going right from A to B. It's going through A, taking a very short but needed breather, and then going to B. A lot of games also use elevator rides for the same purpose. So just a nice little sequence of a clone getting dragged. So an enemy popped out in front of you from a vent, so now you can recognize that is happening at any time, and that's important for later. There's another crate dragon roar, just to remind you that's still there. So I like this sequence right here because I think it throws the player off in multiple ways. When they walk out of the door and look to their right, they see the vent with orange lighting in front of them. Now every time an enemy is attacked, it's been from the front, and it's been from a vent. So they're going to be staring at that vent waiting for the enemy to pop out as they walk up. When they reach a certain point, however, they hear a loud bang from the right unexpectedly. They'll look and see the enemy behind the door, providing a nice little jump scare and throwing them off a little bit more. Then they'll go back to walking towards the elevator while keeping an eye on both the vent and the door. That's when they'll hear the busting of a vent and a scream. They'll be initially thrown off because it wasn't the glaringly obvious vent in front of them, so they'll look at the door assuming the enemy is broken out, but it's still there. This throws them off a little bit more and kind of confuses them as to where the enemy could be. Because I'm betting that they didn't notice the vent directly over the door by the long hallway, back in by the door. This also tells the player to expect the enemy coming from anywhere, and I also just think it's a really scary sight of seeing an enemy run towards you from out of the darkness. Just a little more environmental storytelling to add to the atmosphere. Like I said earlier, how Dead Space set up their enemy introductions was a big inspiration to this game. Every enemy had some kind of setup to their first introduction, and the spitter enemy you face later is the same way. It starts here with hearing them from afar, and then boom, the container falls, raising the tension and putting the player on edge. And then we have a nice little jump scare to pop out just to take advantage of the player's tension. You can easily beat the enemy that pops out, but you know there's something else out there you're going to meet soon. And that will stay in the player's mind as they continue this game, not just for this boss, but for future ones as well. So through this game so far, you've only fought in compact hallways. Now you come to an open area that foreshadows to the player a potential boss fight, or a pack of enemies coming at them, who knows. It puts them on edge. I think every event they see now will give the player some kind of stress response, and I like that being the case. Okay, so now that you killed the monster attacking the clone, you think it's safe and you're going to bring him to the base. You also received the thermal charge you needed, so you think you've completed the side quest and you're ready to go back to blow up the blockage. You think things are looking up for you, but this is actually how I set up the final boss of this prototype, to show the player what it can do and how much of a threat the boss is. It's an acid-spitting enemy and it's very powerful. Okay, so the music changes, you see the monster jump down into the cargo area, and you know it's time for a boss fight. Now you get to walk to the elevator and slowly go down it like a gladiator entering the arena. Ideally, I'd want the boss to shoot at the glass in the hallway by the door, or while going down the elevator, having it crack and break. But it also works here because it will always hit the elevator wall at this point, not the player. This lets the player know that it will be a ranged fight. Avoid the acid, shoot the enemy. In a fully realized game, I would have the spitter just jump from crate to crate, but due to animation limitations, that wasn't going to be possible in a reasonable time frame. But the player needs to know that he's teleporting. So what happens is the player sees the green ring around the stomach area, and then they teleport. That's a sign, that's a signal. I don't want the player to automatically know where the boss will teleport just to add some more challenge, but they'll figure it out when they see it only teleport to 3 locations. So that's the sequence of this boss fight. There's a lot to dive into there. You deal with just a boss until you get familiar with its patterns and how it attacks. It jumps to 3 different locations and shoots strong acid projectiles that you can also shoot to blow up before they hit you. After a short amount of time, 2 enemies appear to add challenge to the fight. You don't know where the boss is while you're fighting the other enemies, so you've got to dispatch them quick. Also, if you noticed, when you zoom, you're very slow, and you can't really dodge the acid. But if you're walking or running, you can't shoot. Movement is also clunky, which makes it hard to avoid the hits. This is intentional and from Dead Space and Resident Evil 4. Both games had clunky movement, which added tension. When enemies are attacking or chasing you, and your character is responding just a step slower than you'd like, When you can't just run and gun your way through the level, and you have to slowly zoom and aim to kill a single enemy when you know there's an enemy coming at you from any direction, all of that adds tension, anxiety, and fear in the player, I believe. The same goes for the doors in this game. Just like Dead Space, they take a little too much time to open, which can be very panic-inducing while you're being chased. You might have also noticed that when moving while you're zooming in, the blaster's accuracy is way down. This is present throughout the game, and it's mainly because the character is a basic infantry clone. I want to stress that, and I want the player to fully believe that and immerse themselves with it. While the character will be able to upgrade that throughout the game and improve, if the character is just coming out of the gate hitting bullseyes on the run, the immersion the player feels as a no-name clone will suffer, as that now moves more into Chosen One territory. But moving on, the player has the plasma torch and is ready to head back to the base and talk to the engineer and start the base building mechanic. Another influence from Dead Space is the backtracking. I absolutely do not view backtracking as a negative thing. I view it as a more realistic and logical way of approaching the level design of something like a spaceship. As long as it's not tedious, there is so much you can do to keep the atmosphere, exploration, and scares fresh for the player. I think it makes the player feel empowered to explore and not like they're having their hand held from point A to point B. Players can also find areas previously closed off to them have now been unlocked when they revisit the area. I think backtracking helps with immersion because it's realistic. In a large ship like the one you're currently on, a big part of the game is going to be figuring your way out, especially when you add obstacles like debris blockage, broken stairs, power outages, and of course enemies at every turn. And speaking of enemies, when you have a new enemy pop out at you in an area you previously visited, the player knows they can expect an enemy coming from anywhere. They can't just walk through an area they've been in without a care in the world. It doesn't matter if you cleared the area before. And I think that not only keeps the backtracking from being tedious, but also prevents those dull transitioning moments some games go through, where a player is bored while walking from an area they've cleared to the next so they can finally be scared again. So I feel that as long as it feels rewarding and serves a purpose, backtracking is a great way to make it an efficient and fun level. So this enemy encounter was just a demonstration of not only the backtracking I just talked about, but also building on concept and pattern. When the player first went through this hallway, they had an enemy pop out from a vent in front of them. Let's call that concept A. Then right after that, you had the enemy come at you from the shadows from behind. That was concept B. They now know that each of these two concepts can come at them at any time. So for this encounter, I put them both together to make concept A, B. I can continue to build off of this pattern in new and fun ways throughout the game. For example, I can show them an enemy coming out of the ground, call it concept C, then I can throw combinations like concept AC or BC or ABC, all three, if I want to, and just keep going from there. And because I showed them A and B before throwing A, B at them, they won't feel like it's unfair because they knew from experiencing A and B that something like this could happen. So from now on, anytime an enemy pops out in front of them, they'll have that panic in the back of their mind that another enemy could be coming right behind them. And they'll be waiting for that enemy scream audio signal that occurs when one is popped out. I think all those little things add to the horror and tension of the game, as well as let me as a level designer experiment with and throw new combinations at the player, without having to set it up with something like a cutscene. I can just throw it at them in a fair way. Here I just wanted to show what would happen if you hit the noise triggers. The blind monster would hear this, roar, and come charge at you, and then you have to fight it. There's another sand monster roar, just so you know. Still there. So you finish the first main quest and given the plasma torch to the engineer. He'll now start sealing the doors and the vents. From this point on, you can talk to him about building any of the upgrades and fortifications to the base, with the first thing being the beds to house more rescued clothes. This is the clone you rescued from the blind monster. He's now at your base and willing to help. He just needs to get patched up better than first aid kits can really achieve. So now your new optional side task is to gather the resources needed to have a med bay built. Once you do that, then you can talk to the engineer and send your rescued clones on resource gathering missions. After that, of course, you have the option to continue on from there with the base building aspect of the game while you progress through the story. Speaking of story, this game will have a lot of objectives and errands you'll have to complete throughout it. The idea for this game is to make the objectives you'll have to complete and the items you'll have to fetch be brought to you in the most logical way possible. Players won't mind having to go on fetch quests or constantly be given objectives by the engineer as long as it's all based on logic and makes sense within the story. For example, you need to get the main power of the ship running again, so you can turn on the tram system, which allows you to fast travel to faraway parts of this really massive ship. It's just a tedious errand, yes, but the player knows it makes sense and it's something they would logically need to do if they were going to escape. The same works for fetch quests. The main character and the engineer are trying to call for help to get out of this horrible situation. It makes sense that you need to go out and get the things that the engineer needs in order to make that happen. There will also be roadblocks at most objectives that will redirect the objective or force the player to go through a rough situation to get through it. And as long as it's logical, I believe the player will accept it without feeling frustrated. And an example would be something like too much rust and acid decay on one of the main power turbines due to a long time of negligence and acid spewing enemies that you've already encountered. So to get the power turned on, they have to divert their objective to traveling somewhere else to get a replacement, fighting through enemies all along the way. Yes, it's an annoying hindrance, but it makes sense. I feel this makes the player more invested in the story rather than frustrating them. So that's the core thought process of how this game's story will go. Moving on, we now have the thermal charge and we're ready to blow up the blockage and progress to the next part of the ship. So obviously this wouldn't happen in the actual game. I just thought it'd be a fun way to end the prototype, as well as show you what the blind monster could do, like charging and attacking, since this playthrough went through the stealth route instead of actually charging head on. So that's my prototype. I hope with this video you can see what I was going for and why I made the design choices I made, as well as get a better idea of what this game would be as a finished product. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this. I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.